Hello, my name is August McKenzie, and I'm a recent graduate of St. John's.
Hi, I'm Sarah Davis. I'm the Dean of the Santa Fe campus. This year, in celebration of the 60th anniversary of our campus, we've been doing a number of things to go back to our roots. One of them is reading early lectures by Jacob Klein. Mr. McKenzie here has been reading out loud during lunch to a room full of students, different Jacob Klein lectures, and we've been discussing them, and we are going to talk about that today. So, Mr. McKenzie, where would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, I could start with just talking about why I chose to read this particular lecture. And it was actually an essay written by Klein. And the reason primarily is because we claim to be a liberal arts school, and it seemed to be worthwhile for us to think about what it actually means to be engaged in liberal education. And so that was the primary motive behind that, because it's a very obscure topic in a way, and I think it's a hard pursuit to actually to identify and also even to defend as a worthy endeavor in itself. But I also think about possible limitations or obstacles that the school as an institution may have in relation to its own stated pursuit.
So when I think about the question of liberal education, I quickly go to the question of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So in some way, education is connected to human freedom. And I think in this essay, Klein goes there. I mean, clearly he does, but in terms of he's going through different kinds of questioning.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets to what we do at the college, descriptively even, of it's not a what is X kind of a question. It's not that we start an inquiry and we find the answer. There's something about the kind of questioning we do is very specific. So let's talk about that. What is the kind of questioning that he's sort of drawing our attention to, and how do we think it's connected to freedom?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, clearly he points out that the type of questioning that's distinctive to liberal education is metastrophic questioning. It's the kind of questioning that is a turning about. So it's not a question that is in search for a particular bit of knowledge or something like out there that is unknown. Or he talks about kind of like the horizon of things into which you can investigate. And that's like the typical way I think we ask questions. But then this kind of metastrophic questioning seems to be a turning the known into an unknown. So a kind of reversal that takes place. And somehow in there seems to be a kind of freedom or liberation that takes place, of where one would think that turning the known into an unknown is a kind of that may not be a freeing experience, but I think the way he talks about it, like that's where freedom might be found.
Yeah, I think also when he describes the early kind of, he goes through different kinds of learning, and it's sort of what is it, the elementary form of learning. It sounds a little to me like we are human beings, we're sort of cultural beings. There are ways of behaving and talking and thinking that we become accustomed to, and it's not the same as other animals. Like there's something distinctive about what we are that makes that a kind of education and not just built into our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
That there are different cultures. Everyone has a way, but it's not the same way. And it seems to me that the freedom part, it sort of articulates for me the difference between the animal and the human, that there are these ways, but there is the capacity, and it happens to us sometimes, where those are called into stark relief. And suddenly the things that felt so, comfortable and you're so at home in, you think that it just are the way the world is, become foreign, and you can ask about them. I think that's connected to freedom. It's pretty interesting. But for me, it's helpful to draw the distinction between at least this comparison with other animals and just sort of the natural law by which animals, always fly south in the winter or whatever it is. There's something about us that both kind of mimics that, but then we have the capacity to sort of take off that cultural clothing and say, wait, I was wearing cultural clothing, and that's interesting.
Yes. No, I very much agree, because it's the fact that we're questioning beings, that we even have the potential to ask questions, right? And that seems to be an important part of what he's pointing to, is what does it actually mean about what we are, that we can ask any kind of question, really, even to begin with. And because we think that this kind of world that we exist in is just the world, but the fact that can break at all, that we can realize that there's different cultures, for example, or I can question the very activity I'm engaged in, that's a very particular way that we can actually find ourselves existing in the world, and yet somehow most of the time we exist completely unaware of that.
Right.
And so it's this kind of breaking out is, I'm not sure. I guess it's not clear to me in the way it's freeing. Is it freeing in the sense of now I have a kind of open horizon of possibilities of way of living? And that doesn't seem to quite exactly what Klein is getting at, but it's hard for me to describe exactly why that's actually a freeing activity, because it could just be a deeply alienating, I don't know how to act, I'm just frozen, and I'm not sure.
I mean, it seems like I think his account is that the formal education, which is not the sort of elementary education, is predicated on the possibility of our being questioning beings, so that we have fields of knowledge or inquiry, like I guess he points to the study of language or logic. I don't have an answer to your question, but my thought is something like, in those metastrophic moments of turning, that sort of bears witness to the fact that we are questioning beings, that we're not trapped in a horizon, although we don't always know that we're even contained within one. And then these fields of knowledge sort of are born out of that possibility, so that when we engage in thinking about language or thinking about logic or mathematics, we're sort of playing in that realm of freedom, that our being questioning beings allow us to interact with our environment in a way that would then develop a field of knowledge like that. But I think the argument is also probably that we don't often recognize that. That typical education, you're sort of, ingesting the grammar and trying to become fluent, but you're not actually engaging with the metastrophe itself. And I think what we hope to do is sort of recall that. Right,
because it does seem like, as you were pointing out, in order for these theoretical disciplines to even emerge, required that initial move to begin with. But as we're not the founders of language, right, or mathematics, to actually encounter that does seem to be a bringing back or returning to a kind of origin of where these things even arise to begin with. So it's like we have this kind of double relationship that's potentially, that we can potentially establish. One is the learning a language, learning mathematics, but then also having that return back to where those things actually arise from to begin with.
And I think we can think of examples in the program where that happens. I mean, I'm sure, the very beginning of Euclid, thinking about the point, or the line, the breathless length, and the kind of discussions that arise, endless discussions about what we thought we understood simply. And so I do think, and we could work on this a little because I'm not ready to articulate it, but why that's horizon breaking, those conversations. So at the very beginning of our freshman math class, we're not asking you to sort of memorize a set of definitions so that you can build upon them. We're asking you to engage in the turning so you recognize that what we're doing is something really different.
Yes. I think this is a place where I struggle with knowing exactly the way it appears, because like when we do engage with the kind of the beginnings of a formal or a theoretical discipline, such as Euclid, or even even in junior lab when we take electricity, right? We take something that's very familiar, a line, we use it all the time, or a point, and then you encounter how strange and and actually how much you actually bring to it that may not actually belong to it initially. And at least that's for me, that's the place where I locate it the most, is realizing the kind of the default way I think about things may not actually be appropriate to it initially, and actually require a whole development of thinking to actually get to where I find myself. But the initial point of it is quite different. And just to ramble with it.
Yeah.
In the case of Junior of electricity, right? I think this is where I find a great tutor in a class very helpful, is pointing out all the places where you have a pith ball with static electricity, and I see it interact with a electroscope or something like that, right? Just a very seemingly simple interaction. And having gone through formal education, right, there I have an account of what's taking place. But what's really helpful is when someone points out, wait, from what you've actually just witnessed, like actually seen, what can you say? And it's usually vastly different from the account that I bring to it. So in that way, it's like I realize I'm not even seeing really what's in front of me, and I'm not actually engaging with the very phenomenon in front of my eyes. And so I'm wondering if it's somewhere in that place, that's the kind of freeing moment, is I'm not engaging with the world until this is let go, and I actually like really think about what is actually happening in front of me. And then seeing the way that this whole, the electromagnetism builds out as a theory, but where it begins from can be quite different.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about that, because I feel like those moments when the familiar becomes foreign are very powerful. And it's what you're saying. I think you connected it to sort of a recognition of the place where you started being in some way much more grounded in opinion than an investigated truth of your own. So you have a sort of fresh start based on this moment. But I'm also just interested in the moment. I think, I think about freshman lab and our dissection practice. Similarly, you think, especially I think high school students coming out of a biology class where you've learned about all of the systems of the body, and you're going into an organism to sort of investigate and understand them better. But unlike the biology textbook, when you actually open an animal, nothing is discrete. It's a sort of a muddle, and having to encounter that as the primary reality. It's not as though the animal's wrong, so whatever that disjunct is I think we do that again and again to say, this is sort of the sort of extracted knowledge, and it's very useful, but it's alienating us in some way. It's exactly what you said, putting us at a distance from the phenomena. But the return to the phenomena, I'm not sure I need more. That feels freeing and beautiful and exciting to me. Just to be up against something in that way makes me think that we're alienated much more than we even realize. That like our walk through the world is fraught with this textbook kind of thing. And so we're providing an experience, or just inviting people into an experience where that kind of waking up is available. But then what does it mean to walk through the world like that in a more continuous way? That's a different question. Yeah, no, and I think that's the one that's perhaps even more interesting, is how you integrate this, right? Because there's this experience that in a way it's almost like things stop in a kind of way, and it doesn't really obviously allow you to continue to move through the world. I mean, even like, for example, let's just take Plato, right? The kind of aphoretic state that a lot of his interlocutors find themselves in. Like, I don't know what justice is all of a sudden, right? But yet somehow I have to then go back to my life as a citizen of a political community, operating under some idea of justice, right? It's not like now I don't know how to act. And so that shift that occurs is itself a very strange thing. And I don't know, and I'm frankly a little bit at a loss exactly how that happens. And why we're not just stuck once we have that moment. I mean, I go quickly as a cultural anthropologist to culture shock. Before I came to St. John's and thought about aporia and thought about all these things, culture shock was fascinating to me as a phenomenon. because of, I think I understood it to be this metastrophic moment. But the idea that it would be possible or one would ever want to live in a constant state of culture shock, there's something dishonest about that, I think. So that the falling back, kind of becoming at home in the world again, so that so the familiar became foreign and you're sort of jarred. But then when that foreign becomes familiar and you start to be at home again, that's comforting. The question is, why does that happen? But it's also, I don't want to do away with it and act as though somehow the most heightened human experience would be in that constant state of shock. And I think different thinkers that I've been thinking about Virginia Woolf lately, the waves, and thinking about, she has accounts of people being very much at home in the world, and there's like a smoothness and ease and superficiality, and then rupture, often interpersonal, but definitely kind of crisis moments, and a reckoning that's beautiful and familiar and important, and then people get swept up again. And I think that book is thinking about that motion as a truth in itself. So not like we want to disabuse ourselves of the feeling at home in the world, but something that we have to reckon with, that the waves. I think that's interesting as a starting point.
For sure. Yeah, and to be able to do that, as you said, like smoothly, right, or gracefully, or something like that, right? That these shifts aren't, life disrupting, but there is a smoothness that can take place. And I'm also wondering if these moments of, whether it be culture shock or whatever it might be, of a kind of breaking and then re-emerging in a way, leads actually in some way to a smoother interaction with the world that's less jarring, perhaps. Like, because I'm just thinking of, like, if you just go back to Plato again, if you have a certain conception of justice or the good or whatever it might be that actually doesn't hold up under any scrutiny, if that's the thing you're using to engage with the world, and that causes some problems, and it may be in ways you don't even recognize, like as what the cause might be. And so I'm wondering if it's the re-engagement, it's not just going back, but an actual kind of, if somehow you are able actually to engage with the world in a much smoother way than before, and that's perhaps the height. And I don't know, but maybe that's one-sided as well. And like you were saying, maybe it's the full picture that Virginia Woolf was painting, as all the movements is itself the thing we're after, to do all of that smoothly, not just one of them.
It reminds me of the Iris Murdoch that we read for All College Seminar, her account of the philosopher coming back into the cave with more clarity. It reminds me of what you're saying in terms of when you do re-engage something like the conventional world, you're not operating, say, on that problematic version of justice from before. It may not be fully revealed, but the work that the moment of aporia and the education that happened as a result actually have you reemerge. And this smooth is an interesting word. I'm not sure about that, but some sort of enhanced clarity. I think that seems really right.
Yeah. The more I think about smoothness, the more I have a problem with it, because even in the allegory image, the philosopher does not come. It's not a smooth re-entry. Right?
Yeah, right. Totally.
And I think that's like another interesting thing is it can create problems. Like if you live in a community that has other ends from the ones you recognize as might be the highest ends of human life. Even the reconciliation between those two may be. You could argue that it might actually make one's life much more complicated in some ways to actually know how to reintegrate. I've heard this from friends that were in my class last year going home again. It can be quite a shift, because now you're surrounded by people with, you don't have a common experience. Like, these books are not common or themes that are common that you can talk about, and so it's not obvious to me if this actually allows one to engage better in the typical world one finds oneself in. In many ways, possibly not.
Yeah, I have thought about this a lot, especially in my time as a new tutor. You're so engaged in this work, and it's so compelling. And then I would go home to my family, to my kids' soccer game, to a dinner party, and feel a little bit alienated. And I think we all have that experience. And I've gone through different sort of takes on that problem. I think where I've landed most recently is the biggest challenge, sort of philosophical challenge, is to understand the way in which these questions are live questions, human questions, not up on a hill, only in the books kind of questions. And I actually really think that's right. Like, I know it's a text, or texts, but that Plato is engaging with interlocutors, it's all conversational. I take that seriously. So, I think people's relation to their children or profound moments, there's metastrophic turning. That's sort of what I mean. And not that people then lean into that moment of education as the grounds for the rest of their life. I think often that gets sort of subdued and people go about their business. But trying to connect with people in the places that have that character. I mean, that's been my life path of like, how do I not just reconcile of like, I want coherence in my life, but given how important I think the work we do is, I actually really do believe it has to be applicable.
Yeah.
We're talking about human life. That's why this is important. And it comes in different forms. I think one has to be kind of a detective and have an eye or an ear out for it. But yeah, that's sort of the way I feel right now.
Yeah, no, yeah, I've gone back and forth on it as well. Because it's, on the one hand, one can just assume that maybe these topics are not always readily available. I mean, like, I know, like, just at different points in my life, these things have not always been the things I'm focused on at all. And so then there's this kind of like, I don't worry about the kind of integration in that way. But then there's other times where it might feel like, where I think, is that actually just a failure on my end if I fail to, or if I'm unable to engage with people outside of this community in that way. And it's not, I don't know. And I think it just depends on how idealistic I feel about these kind of things at the time. But yeah, but it does put, I do find myself in a kind of in a strange relationship with the rest of my life. There's what I do and what I have been doing here, and then I go and work at the farmer's market, and how those things actually interact is, I think that's actually probably the primary place that I've been trying to understand as of late.
That's interesting. You want more? So in the part of the essay where Klein discusses leisure as the kind of necessary condition in which this kind of work can be done well, I always find it, I think that that's less straightforward, that I don't totally understand it. So on the one hand, I think that there's a sense in which if one is preoccupied with, the tasks of staying alive, of providing for oneself, of just being in the world and through necessity having to work, there is no time for this kind of reflection, and thus we really need leisure for something like this to happen. But I also have the thought, given the way he's described the metastrophic moment and sort of the rupture or jarring, that doesn't seem exactly leisurely to me. So I think that's my question about what we think he means about it. I think he puts it as like we have to be educated or understand how to use our leisure time, that it shouldn't just be entertainment. And I take it's something like this educative activity, but it's so potent or energized and sort of, it requires so much work that, it's beautiful and enjoyable work, but nonetheless, I think normally when we think of the word leisure, there's this sense of like, oh, you're not doing anything. And so, I don't know, what do you think about that tension? Do you know what I mean?
I think I see what you're getting at. I guess I don't, because the way, I think that's like what Aristotle says, is, we're not just amusing ourselves. like because an amusement would be the end of life, right? If that's what we do with time that is actually devoted for no purpose beyond itself, right? And so in that way, I mean, like I don't. So I can see like in like kind of the common conception of the word leisure, I'm gonna go on my lazy boy and watch TV, right? But in this way, it's the way that Aristotle, or I mean the way that Klein speaks about it there. I don't quite see the tension. Mm-hmm. Actually, just say more what you meant by like how the metastrophic moment or that way of questioning does not strike you as leisure-like.
Right. So I suppose. I mean, I was an anthropology graduate student, mm-hmm. so it was part of my employment and my, life path. But the idea that that moment of culture shock is not. I'm trying to think through his point of view. So if one is embedded with the necessities of life, the idea that you might not have the time or sort of luxury or space to recognize, like, when something that is deeply familiar to you has suddenly mm-hmm. become foreign, and you sort of begin to wonder about the world. So maybe that's what we mean. You need to, like, outside of providing for oneself, there has to be room for this kind of reflection. On the other hand, I think that even the word culture shock, that it's disruptive and uncomfortable, I think there's just something about that kind of that stands in contrast somehow to me, but I may be leaning too heavily on sort of the ordinary, the lazy boy version of leisure.
Yeah, because I guess I mean, like, so if we could say, so if leisure is a kind of freeing from like obligations of life, whether it be political obligations, family, whatever it might be, then we think that we can almost like distance ourselves from the things that like are real in a way, or something like that, where it's like I'm kind of stepping back and just going into your room or up on the hill at St. John's or whatever it might be, right? But whereas this kind of metastrophe, these encounters, I mean, that's where it seems like we actually encounter something real. And that, so there seems to be both that kind of removing from the things that we would consider to be the most immediate things in our lives, but yet one claims that through doing this, one actually encounters something perhaps just as real, if not more real. Mm-hmm. Is there, I don't know if something there. Or... Yeah,
and I think I'm also thinking about like the idea of angst or different thinkers who will, I mean, this isn't so Platonic, but who will associate this metastrophic moment or awakening moment with a kind of anxiety in relation to the world. Yeah. And so I guess when we say leisure, the sense of putting the have-to-dos aside and opening up space for oneself, once it becomes about anxiety or something disruptive, that's a little harder. It just changes the framework a little.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, I mean, I would say that so I guess I'm more sympathetic to the idea of leisure as being necessary for this, just because, like, what is the condition under which this anxiety, if we describe it as a kind of anxiety or angst, for it to actually take place? I mean, like for example, about a year and a half ago, I was having a bit of a crisis, like, what am I going to do once I graduate? And law school is a real thing on my mind. And so then my whole focus is around, okay, I need to make plans to do this thing, and I have some idea of what I'm going to do with my life afterwards, which are all like real things. Like I don't have a trust fund or anything like that, right? Like it's the economic realities are quite real. And so in those kind of moments, it was extremely hard for me to actually allow for that anxiety or whatever it might be of encountering these kind of these moments of realizing I don't know something, for example. I can't have that while also worrying about this. Like those, it's very hard to let that go and allow for additional unknowns or for the very ground that I'm standing on in a way, to allow that to start to disappear. So in that way, like I'm quite sympathetic to the idea that we really need, and not for, it doesn't have to be like long stretches of time, it can just be moments of the day where those things are truly forgotten about, to allow for for us to actually confront that other aspect of life.
It opens up a whole set of questions. I mean, I'm thinking about, I spent a lot of time thinking about Durkheim when I was a graduate student, and the elementary forms of religious life, and the very sort of reductive version of the one version of the argument is thinking about, is it the case that there are human beings, they fulfill their needs for food and shelter and necessity, and then once stabilized establish a religion, or are the elementary forms of religious life sort of primordial and primary, connected to the capacity for language and reason, so that, you know, I think, and I'm really interested in that kind of argument, the idea that there's certain poetic, philosophical aspects of the human being that are not, they don't come after the fact, but are actually there from the start. Yes. So that I wonder about that.
Yeah, no, okay, so I mean, that makes sense to me in the sense that, I mean, because I think, I mean, one thing that I would say is from my own experience is that when I have those moments of like the law school thing, right, that actually in a way can orient me very strongly to this other way of a kind of having to let go, like of having to really think about I don't want to say a proper relation, but let's use a proper relation with that thing that seems so compelling at that time. Like it kind of demands me to actually really think about that. Is that kind of like where with the religiosity it arises not when we just have freedom, but when we're like engaged with it, or to just have some mind.
Or like the idea that we are meaning-seeking beings, so that when we're thinking about our occupation in life, how we fulfill, you know, our needs for food and shelter, the fundamentals, that it may not, as a question, is it the case that it's sort of driving, the instincts come first, we've got to fulfill those, and then maybe if we're lucky a desire for meaning comes, or is it really the case that those are simultaneous for human beings? Not to say that one has the luxury of chasing down the meaning question, but is the meaning question always kind of there in terms of one wants not just to, it's things like that we cook our food. This goes to the anthropology, actually, like the sort of practices around fulfilling our necessities, the artistry of that suggests to me that it's not just fill my belly, make sure I'm, you know, like there, whatever, that those are coming together all the time just complicates the location in which we ask questions of meaning.
But it's okay, so but it's not obvious to me though that kind of seeking meaning or establishing meaning, or it's not, how that relates to this, to the rupture. Because if anything, it seems like those ways of being really establish a kind of, I mean, I guess the question, like, where does meaning come from, right? Does meaning come from this kind of, these metastrophic moments? That's not obvious to me. Maybe it does, but like, it's something I haven't really thought through, whereas I really can see meaning arriving in tradition, and like, especially family tradition, you know, every night you sit down with your family and have dinner and cook together. And so like how those relate, I don't know. And because the one almost seems to disrupt that meaning-making activity, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a really hard question. I mean, generally the way I think about it has to do with the tradition, which looks for Klein like that elementary learning. I probably, at the end of the day, but it would take a long time to establish this, would argue that is a sort of sedimentation that sets in, and it's what we do. You know, we pass things on, we routinize things, but the possibility of it arising, that it does for humans and not other animals, is fundamentally metastrophic in its origin. So something like, and this is sort of too much to say all at once for sure, but I think, you know, when we think about language and the origin of language, and I think a reductive version of that is like we're using our rational capacities to sort of put post-its on things so we can better communicate with each other. And there are accounts, Rousseau has one, of the first human utterance being more like song than labeling. So like that eruption of song, what is that? What is being put into the world in that moment? And I'm not going to give it, but that something like that looks more like a turning. So the idea that then once the song has erupted, it becomes codified and people sing together, and we're sort of working toward culture and tradition and that making a home in the world. And then something like recollection might be necessary in order to unearth the metastrophic moment at the core. That's sort of the way I start to approach those questions.
Yeah. I think probably my limitation right now with like thinking through this is that I think I'm still, just in my own life, still very much in the earlier phase of just the kind of disrupting part, and it's not clear to me how that actually forms a life. Because I mean, seriously, I mean, like it's like in light of that, like does like having those experiences, going out, like if one gets married or starts a family or whatever it is, like something does usually establish itself in life. And I guess like I don't know what that looks like really.
So just because I'm working on it right now, this is I think it's worth thinking about, and I like this line of thought about friendship in light of what you just said. So thinking about War and Peace and the scene of Pierre and Prince Andre on the ferry. So Prince Andre's in one of these low moments, you know, he doesn't feel the meaning, and they have this conversation, and they have a deep philosophical friendship, and you watch him sort of be enlivened by Pierre and wake up and open up. And I always think in our program again and again that the ground that the friendship provides is different than the sedimented ground of tradition. And what does that mean? To be engaged with another human who's also struggling with these problems. And it's not exactly that you found your way to the other side and now you're singing together the same song, which will then be sung by your children and you're starting your own tradition. It's more that there is a kind of mutual recognition of the problem itself that allows you to say, kind of, I see you and I know this is real. Thank goodness. You know what I mean? Like that there's something solid there that's not, or something more stable.
I can see that.